novel. And Dave's book starts as it is. The alleys of Washington, D.C. are unlike those of any other city. Is there anything special in it? Or is that like unbelievably important? Surprisingly, yes. What we're having, we have alleys. We have Washington. And
we have a body.
Not yet, though.
Not yet.
So, it places us in a city that basically all of us been to or know. So, Washington is also here immediately, and we have alleys. And I, of course, started thinking why the alley is in the first sentence. If alley is for garbage in Chicago, and what is the point for it? Of course, I read, and I came almost to the last paragraph. But then previously to it, I had a conversation with you, and would you share that explanation, because it's just fascinating.
Gladly, thank you. And this will not give away the ending, so there will be no spoiler alert necessary. But I think that the larger significance of that first sentence for me, after I wrote it, was to think about what makes Washington special. And as a city and a capital, what we have are overlapping jurisdictions. So later in chapter 1, the body drops. The body is found. Now, this is so commonplace in mysteries. We take it for granted. The body's discovered, the police arrive. That's the normal procedure, but not in Washington, D.C. This particular alley, though it is residential, now belongs to the U.S. Navy in April 1945, which is expanding the Navy Yard, though it hasn't relocated the residents or raised the properties and made it part of the Navy Yard. So when the report of a dead naval intelligence officer reaches the Office of Naval Intelligence, the head of the section who takes the call says, "You guys go investigate." This puts our narrator into the story and his partner, and find out if this guy was up to anything hinky. If not, you push the murder back on the local cops. But until then, let them know we're in charge. So any other alley, any other city, the local police have jurisdiction, not in Washington. And as Ziggy suggested, this is an important key that's turned at the end of the story involving our narrator. And the position of the body, the choice of that alley for the murder, was a calculated one by the forces that are behind what's going on.
So technically, alley was out of the regular city jurisdiction. It was under naval jurisdiction. How it worked at that moment?
At that particular
1945, or just after the 1945.
At that particular moment, it was kind of in flux because the Navy, and this is actually based on an actual piece of Washington, D.C. that was residential at the time in 1945 and is now part of the Navy Yard. So the Navy technically owned it, but they could have easily said to the local police, "You take that," if this was an actual event.
So alley alleys really mean a lot, surprisingly, if we're talking political thriller. The Dead Don't Bleed, a new book, but and the first novel by David Krugler, that is fascinating, and that really lead us to the next issue or next question about how it happened that suddenly you decided, or you came to the conclusion that it will be Washington, that will be 1945, or just after.
Great, thank you. I mean, when I decided to write the novel, where to set it and when was the easiest part, because I couldn't imagine doing a story outside of Washington, D.C. It's a city I know well historically from my research, and the more I've learned about it, the more fascinated I am by it. So there was that natural interest to put it in Washington in 1945, and especially in the spring of 1945, because it must have been such an exciting time to be in Washington. I mean, imagine the capital by this point, as the war draws to a close, is still bursting at its seams. In early 1942, young women were arriving from all over the country, urged on by government propaganda. They get to Union Station, they don't know anyone, they don't have a job, they don't have a place to stay, but by the time they leave the train station, they have a job and a boarding house to stay at. The boarding houses are so full, people are sleeping on ships. They're sharing cots because the government is operating around the clock. and thinking about what it would be like to be young and living in that situation, but during war. What a push and pull of remarkable forces, people wanting to enjoy themselves, but under rationing, dealing with this crowding. And in April of 1945, with the war drawing to a close, there's all this pent-up anticipation. Yes, the war is going to end soon. What are we going to do then? What's going to happen? You know, we're going to see this victory through. We're young. So, although the story itself is a murder wrapped up in espionage, I wanted it to be in a really exciting, unique place and time. In Washington, D.C. in April of 1945, into May of 1945 was a natural choice. And I needed to time the murder so that the investigation would be taking place on VE Day, Victory in Europe. And in an original version of the novel, I have to admit, I didn't really take advantage of that exciting night in the story that was told. And then in the many rewrites, I said, well, one of the reasons I need to be rewriting this is I squandered that opportunity. And so I hope the VE night is all the more exciting, not only because of how it advances the story and creates suspense and tension, but also just because we're in this nightclub, and Ellis Voigt, our narrator and protagonist, this investigator for the Office of Naval Intelligence, is there with his girlfriend, who he's had to go to great lengths to meet because he's supposed to be undercover, but he comes up as himself so he can be there with her, and then the news comes out on the dance floor that Germany has surrendered, and excitement ensues.